Poet Beats.
Hey everybody, this is Reverend Michael Malcolm. I am the founder and executive director of the People's Justice Council, as well as the executive director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. And it is in that capacity that I come to you today. I come to you as the executive director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. I've got my co-host Kyle Kreider here with me, who is the program and policy director of the People's Justice Council, as well as Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. And our special guest today is none other than John Northrop, who is with Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll let Kyle first give a word to the people, and then we'll let John come on in and introduce himself, and he can take it from here. Afterwards, we'll come and we'll ask a few questions, and hopefully you'll find yourself both entertained and educated by this episode. Kyle?
Appreciate it, Rev. Yeah, it is always a pleasure, but I'm very glad to welcome John Northrop here today. I've been a member of the Birmingham Citizens Climate Lobby and welcome the leadership of John Northrop and our good mutual friend, Dr. Joyce Lanning, and others on these very, very valiant efforts.
Thank you. It's good to see both of you folks today, and hello to anyone who will see us later. Really a pleasure to be with you. I've listed a few of the jobs I've had over the years that have involved legislative advocacy, so that you can see what I'm drawing on. And I've highlighted down here at the bottom, I'm the group leader of the local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter. And I will tell you up front that a lot of what I have to say about legislative advocacy comes from the method that we've learned and practiced with CCL. I'd like to start off with a picture of the slide here of the great stained glass window at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham that came as a gift from the people of Wales many years ago following the horrific bombing of 1963. And those of you who are familiar with the window know that the two hands raised by the Christ figure there, one on the left represents the power of confrontation, and the one on the right represents the power of friendship and sharing, and in this case, advocacy. And although there's room for and a need for both confrontation and advocacy to bring about desirable change, today, I just want to focus on the advocacy side of things and take you through some thoughts on that. And here's the agenda for today. I'm going to run through what is legislative advocacy, talk about why constituents matter. Is lobbying a dirty word? Talk about two key approaches to advocacy. How to plan a meeting with a legislative or elected leader, and talk a little bit about teamwork versus individual action, and close out with some summary do's and don'ts in advocacy. First of all, let's talk about what I'm going to mean by legislative advocacy, and it comes from the Latin. This word advocacy means to speak to. And in this case, when we're advocating, we're speaking to power. And for our purposes today, I'd like to define legislator as any elected official who makes policies or makes or enforces policies, ordinances, or laws. But the overall or underlying purpose of legislative advocacy is to build political will for action. Politicians don't typically build will for action. They typically follow expressed will of the public. Now, legislative advocacy involves a variety of activities, and it can involve letters and phone calls. It can involve outreach to potential allies who can join you in a campaign for change. And it certainly can involve positive media attention that you might be able to generate. But today, what I want to say today will affect or applies to these areas, but today I want to talk mainly about this area, which is face-to-face lobbying. And that can be either in physical meetings or, as circumstances these days require, it can be via technology such as we're using today. First big question, does money matter in legislative advocacy? And yes, it does. I could give you examples of that, but I think everybody pretty much shares the impression that money does talk when it comes to getting things done in government. But it's not the only thing that talks. The other thing that talks is our people. And let me share with you a quote here from Marshall Saunders, who is the gentleman from California who founded Citizens Climate Lobby way back in 2008. Ordinary people like you and me have to organize, educate ourselves, give up our hopelessness and powerlessness, and gain the skills to be effective with our government. And that's the spirit that we bring forward. So indeed, volunteer citizen lobbyists are good folks too. Lobby is not necessarily a dirty word, because what it involves is people standing up for what they believe is right and necessary, and working hard to bring a new reality into play. And we're talking here about constituents, you and me. We're talking people who actually live within a jurisdiction that is led by some kind of an elected official or group of elected officials. And constituents are super powerful when they're together on things, because these are the people who give the power, who loan the power to the elected officials who are in charge of our daily rules and regulations. But there are two types of constituents. Every constituent has an opinion. For example, I believe the SNAP program is good. But those with an opinion and a personal story have to say a little bit more. And it can be a very simple story, but it anchors this constituent in the mind and the memory of an elected official. So an example would be, I believe the SNAP program is good because without it, I can't afford to feed my 3-year-old daughter. That tends to hold a place in an elected politician's mind better than just simply, I want you to approve the SNAP program. And so as we get to lobbying methods, let's focus a little bit on that quote at the very top. Be genuinely interested in everyone you meet, and everyone you meet will be genuinely interested in you. And that's kind of where we're coming from in our lobbying method with CCL. It's all about relationships. You've heard in real estate terms, location, location, location is what's important when buying a house. When it comes to lobbying, we believe that relationships are the bedrock foundation for effectiveness. And we build good relationships with the right kind of attitude. And that comes, that's demonstrated in respect and appreciation for an elected official. Those who are familiar with the Birmingham Pledge know that in it, it says that all people are entitled to dignity and respect, regardless of race and background. Well, that goes for politicians. All politicians deserve respect and appreciation. An effective citizen lobbyist is going to come from an attitude with an appreciation for the best in others. We basically feel that people are good. Even though there's some bad things they do, we expect people to be good, and we want to appeal to that goodness that we share. And our attitude too is that we want to stand for solutions. It's sometimes easier to be against something, but it's a lot easier to build support when you're working for something particular, explicit, concrete. Now, we come from this positive attitude, but we're always looking to build common ground. And one fundamental piece of positive ground is our shared values. And if, as we say, most people are good, then we're looking for those good values that hold us together. For example, most everybody values children. And so if we can find a connection with an elected leader around children, then that's going to be a workable platform. And we talk about social connections and places we care about. In other words, it's the people and where the people are that we share in common with elected leaders. This helps us make that human connection that is so important to building forward thrust for a better world. Now, effective citizen lobbying involves two major thrusts that are completely simpatico. The first is that we build relationships with our legislators and their staffs. And number two, we know and share about local impacts. I want to say a little bit more about both of those. When we're building relationships with our elected officials, we need to get to know the specifics about them and their lives, their children, their interest outside office. For example, if they like tennis or golf or football or whatever. This is just basic human relations where you show interest in what the elected leader is interested in. Also, we seek to become a trusted advisor and policy expert, as I say here, especially from the local perspective. In other words, if I were to go and try to advise a national leader on nuclear arms policy, there would be a limit to what I might be able to know and share credibly with that elected leader. But if I went to speak with them about the importance of say, a park system in a local area, for example, if I were going to city council and asking for some park improvements, I could talk very explicitly about drainage problems and plant species that might be important there, the runways, the walkways that we would need to have in a piece of property for a good park. And we could talk about it from a shared perspective, knowing what we know about our own locality. And if we're building long-term relationships with our elected leaders, we need to communicate frequently, and it can't be just about the time of day. It needs to be about topics of mutual interest. And when our elected leaders care enough to say, come to a local meeting or a town hall of some sort, we need to show up and be visible. We need to demonstrate that we care what that leader has to say and that we want to be available to him with our expertise, our knowledge, and our concerns. And underlying it all, of course, is, it goes right back to what I said earlier. We really, to build a good relationship with an elected leader, need to show that person respect, appreciation, and gratitude. And not just put on the clothing of respect, appreciation, and gratitude, but we need to really look deep inside and find something authentic that we really care about, that the elected leader has done or said that we find very supportive and helpful to our situation. And the second major thrust in citizen lobbying is know and share about local impacts. And this gets back to what we said about the two kinds of constituents. It's important to know the facts about a policy or situation, and it's also important to frame those facts with personal stories that make those facts come alive for the person, for the elected leader that is listening to us. So if you decide that you're going to be involved with elected leaders and you want to have an online or face-to-face meeting with one or more, you need to think very carefully in advance about how you'll run your meeting or how you'll pursue your meeting. Very explicitly plan to open your meeting with an expression of appreciation for the elected leader. Be able to say something really positive and deeply and personally appreciative from you to him or her. Make sure you know exactly what your goals are for the meeting. Determine if you have, maybe you just have what we call a primary ask and you don't have any other ask, but it'd be good sometimes if you know that you want something in particular and you know that it might take a little work over time to get that something from or with that elected leader, you might want to have some backup suggestions and ask to move the person along, maybe help that person, that elected leader, take some baby steps toward your eventual goal. And be sure to brainstorm in advance a list of possible open-ended questions, because one thing you want to do with an elected leader is to engage in dialogue. And through an open-ended question, not a yes or no question, but something that just provides a doorway for the elected leader to walk through with his own concerns and his own perspectives. This is a demonstration of true respect to be able to listen to and respond to that leader's own interest and concerns. Be sure to carefully gather materials that you need in support of your mission with the elected leader and bring them along. And this last item, determine the meeting roles. Now, this is where we move into the possibility of teamwork. And indeed, in CCL's work with elected leaders, we always try and usually are successful in having teams come and visit with a congressperson, for example. So there are many roles, R-O-L-E-S, that a legislative lobbying team will have to fill. And if you're in the room alone, then you're going to have to address a lot of these yourself individually. And that's why it's easier sometimes to have a group if you can pull one together. But let's just say either you're doing it by yourself or you're doing it with a team. These are these specific roles that you need to pay most attention to. As we said, you open with an appreciation. So there's someone assigned to be the appreciator to open the meeting. Someone is assigned to monitor the time. We hear in CCL that Congress people really like the fact that when we come into a meeting with them, we confirm how much time they have, and then we have a timekeeper who makes sure that we don't run over that time. Again, it's a sign of respect to stick to the allotted time and take care of our business in that time. A deliverer can be in charge of bringing in supporting materials. There should be a note taker if you can get one, and notes are important because sometimes there are different memories about what is said, and it would be very helpful to have a record for the next meeting about how much ground was covered and what was decided or said at that time. I'm skipping over dialogue for a second. In a team, there would be an asker, someone who would actually make the direct ask for the policy action that you're seeking. There could be more than one observer, just people who don't necessarily speak but want to be there to show support. We always like to have a photographer with us, and that in the day of cell phones, that's pretty easy, so that we can get a picture of ourselves with the congressman in our case, and then post it in various social media, or maybe even send to a local newspaper or whatever. To celebrate the fact that we had a civil meeting with an elected official. And then there would be follow-up. Someone, particularly if the elected official asks for some further information, someone needs to leave the room on the team with the clear responsibility of getting that information or those materials back to the elected leader. So to kind of sum up in some easy do's and don'ts, in legislative lobbying, always think relationships, always be confident. It's good to be respectful, but you don't have to be fawning. You don't have to be subservient, because you are a citizen and this elected leader works for you, and he or she knows that, and you can be sure that they want to hear what you have to say. Always be positive. Give that respect, appreciation, and gratitude that we talked about. always use facts, and I put in there truth because sometimes the facts can be cherry picked, and you want to present facts that are overall supportive of the truth. And your stories, be sure to include your stories or a story. I learned something from a great lobbyist out in Arizona where I worked, that if on those rare occasions when he passed along information to a legislator that turned out to be wrong information, he was sure that he got to that person, to that legislator, as quickly as possible to correct that misstatement, so that the legislator didn't hear that from someone else. It's a matter of maintaining your own credibility, and you show that you're not afraid to make mistakes, but you're always willing to correct those mistakes. And then, which I see here that I meant to put, I didn't go back to dialogue in the last slide, but this is basically what we're talking about here. Listen, ask, listen, and repeat. What you're looking for is more of a conversation with an elected leader than simply you're stepping up on a soapbox and announcing what you want. You're trying to engage this elected leader as a human being. So always try to edge toward conversation. You want to make sure you get your points in, but you want to make sure that it comes across as from one person to another in a mutually respectful way. By all means, don't go into a meeting upset with an elected leader. Don't be upset, and don't get upset. There are times that we've been in lobbying meetings where an elected leader has said something that has really rubbed some of us the wrong way, but we just don't go there. We try to focus on the next meeting at that point to make sure that we leave with everybody having shall we say, a good taste in their mouth, and an openness for the next meeting where perhaps we can do a little bit better job of getting the message across, and perhaps not provoking something unpleasant. And the last don't here is, I would say, speak no ill, and that would be not just of the elected official you're dealing with, but remember, you're always for something. And if you're against something, that's just not really the best time to work against it. And it's certainly no time to badmouth someone else, some other person. As you know, if some people, when they hear you say bad things about other people, they wonder, well, are you saying bad things about me when I'm not in the room? So to inspire confidence in your basic goodness and your basic trustworthiness, just stay positive, don't go negative. And then one last slide here, back to this one. As I said, all of these are valid lobbying or advocacy activities. We focus mostly on lobbying, but you can see how if you're writing a letter to a congressman, you want to be real positive. For example, if you're making a phone call to an elected leader, you want to be real positive. So a lot of the things that we've talked about here apply in your dealings in these other areas. Always remember what you want. Always remember that the best way to get it is to focus on that rather than what you don't want. Focus on what you like and push hard for that, and don't waste much time and energy pushing against what you dislike. So with that, folks, what do y'all think? Michael and Kyle.
Thank you very much, John. Well, many things occurred to me over the course of your conversation, but I'd like to start with, I really appreciate your emphasis on story. Your example was very powerful about SNAP. It's one thing to say, I'm a fan, I advocate SNAP, but it's another thing if you say, I'm an advocate for SNAP because my daughter could not eat without it. that's powerful. And our brains are wired for story, not fact. So as important as it is for us to have our facts straight, truth is very important. You know, evidence-based reasoning and all these things that I try to teach my students. But you know, the bottom line is our brains are wired for story, and that is how we connect with others. So thank you for that emphasis. And I'm reminded, that's an example. I've been going through some coaching schools of my own. I'm in an energy fellowship, and I'm being taught organizational literature, or how to organize from some of the big thinkers like Marshall Gantz in the field. And Marshall Gantz has basically divides things into three kinds of stories. There's the story of me, and that SNAP example is a great example. The story of me. Here's why I matter. Here's who I am. That rapidly devolves or evolves into the story of us. I need to bring you into the conversation. Even if you're on the other side of the table, it's especially important for me to bring you into the conversation. What is our shared vision? Do we have any common bridges between us? And that brings us to the third and most important story, the story of now. What is the change that is needed? And with that, I'll turn it over to Rev for his commentary. But thank you, John. Very good stuff.
Thank you, Cal.
So, John, I guess I do have, actually, I got a few questions, but I'll try to limit as many as I can so we can be as succinct as possible. But my first question is from a practical sense. When setting up legislative days, how would you go about doing that from a practical sense? How much time do you want to give in advance? Yada, yada.
It all depends on the particulars of your ask, your situation. It depends on the staffing that is available to a particular elected leader. If it's a congressperson, they typically have staff that receive requests for meetings, and most often, we believe, check with the primary, with the elected leader, him or herself, to make sure that he or she wants to meet with us. In some cases, when I have lobbied down in the Alabama legislature, for example, I found that there is an office staff person, a shared office person down there at the Capitol, who will take requests, and then typically you'll find out from them if you need to make an appointment through that person, or maybe that particular legislator wants appointments made back at home where he or she lives through some kind of a staff person there. But it's always going to start with a staff person, at least, unless you know the elected official personally, in which case that sometimes that's a lot easier. But it really does depend on a variety of factors. And this is, I think, a good thing. If you don't know the elected leader, you're set up immediately to enter an intended relationship from an inquiry, from an ask and listen point of view. You know, you're asking. And so the key thing is, don't say, okay, look, I've got to have this time with this guy. When can you give me? No. The concept is to enter the conversation with a staff person as respectfully as you would with the legislator, with the elected leader, and just explore, probe, find out what the market will bear. You'll probably have in your mind, in terms of the length of time, you'll probably have in mind the kind of time you'll need. And typically a staff person will say, well, how much time will you need? And you can ask. And if they say, well, we really are real tight right now, we can only give you 15 minutes in the next week. If you can wait a month, maybe we can give you 30 minutes. You just have to play that in back and forth and just work it out. But I think the most important thing is that, and certainly in my experience, I've never encountered an elected official who just flat out wouldn't meet. And I've met with some who see things very, very differently from me. And I'll have to say, so far, with one or two people, I haven't made a lot of ground. But they always are willing to talk and listen.
So, again, along those same veins, when are the best times for us to do legislative action?
Well, I tell you, let's talk about Alabama, for example, the legislature. The very best time, in my experience, is not when these folks are actually in session, when they're in the Capitol. The best time is leading up to that, or just after it. What you want to do is, by the time the legislature comes together, an awful lot of the agenda is kind of set in individual minds. And you're not necessarily going to be able to make a dent right then for that particular session. For one thing, there's so many ideas that come to these people outside of their actual meeting times that it's a little bit like a fire hose of bills that get introduced. So, and sometimes it takes, well, usually it takes more than 1 year to get a particular bill through. You have to keep working and working and working. So I have talked with legislators during the session and gotten through, but I found that it works much better if I had a major ask to lay the groundwork outside the session. Congress works a variety of ways. With CCL, we've met with Congress people both during a session and at home. It sometimes depends on which they choose to do. So, and Congress is one of those things where it never shuts down, really. I mean, they go home for periods of time, but they have sessions year round, whereas in the state legislature, it's just roughly 3 months in the spring. So that'll break down to what will work best is when they've got the time for you, but they're going to have to tell you when that is.
Okay. I guess my last question for that series of questions, who do we see? Who do we actually see when it comes down to our legislator? Who do you need to target, I guess, when it comes down to legislative advocacy?
Well, it always depends on what you want and who's in charge of that in a given legislative body. As we know, there are different committees set up in the legislature. There are different committees set up in Congress. In the Birmingham City Council, there are different committees. And typically what you want to do is, if there's some specialization or special expertise within that body, you want to go to them, to those people for the appropriate attention for your particular problem. Now, in one sense, and I think that's the way it works at the local level, perhaps even better than other places. In the case of Congress, at the top end, you may have a particular interest in a particular, say tax proposal or something. And it may be that none of our congressional representatives are on the Ways and Means Committee in the House, or whatever the equivalent is in the Senate. And so you're kind of stuck with who you've got. But one thing that would be nice is that if you could work, if you have a really strong relationship with your own congressman or your own U.S. senator, then a concern that you have that he or she might not have direct influence on, it might lead to a communication on the side between your representative and the other Congress member who has more direct responsibility. So all good communication, all substantive positive communication, it's a little drip, drip, drip that increases your possibility of hitting pay dirt and a positive effect down the road.
Kyle, I don't want to suck up all the space, so I do want you to jump in and feel free to ask questions or give comments if you have anything else.
I appreciate it, Rev. No, sounds like you've got more. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. So we've covered things from like this macro sense and asking about the practicalities of legislative advocacy. But let me go micro for a moment and look at how our faith communities can be involved. First, I'm gonna ask you, how can our faith communities be involved? Also, what do we need to avoid as faith communities in our involvement? And lastly, with that, in that same vein, during this time of pandemic, how specifically can faith communities advocate virtually?
Well, I think everything that I've talked about is what citizens can do. And citizens wear many hats. Ultimately, the citizen hat is a fairly generic hat, so a hat we all share. And if we happen to be members of one group or another, those groups as themselves may or may not be able to engage. For example, Citizens Climate Lobby is a particular kind of organization that's empowered as an organization to speak on behalf of a particular agenda. On the other hand, if a church, a 501c3 organization, went on record in certain political discussions, there'd be some question about your tax exempt status and whether you would be violating your tax exempt status by getting to engage politically. Certainly, if it came to endorsing candidates, that would be a real big problem for a church. But the way I see it is, and I think this is pretty safe, if an ad hoc group of volunteers, concerned citizens got together, even if they're members of this church and or that church, and or an environmental organization and or a justice organization, I think that what you can do there is, as individuals, organize to make a political plea. And I don't think it threatens any organizations, any existing legal organization status when members from those organizations get together to achieve a shared purpose. So,
John, real quick, because now you kind of got me excited. I must admit, it doesn't take much, but now I'm excited. So now let me ask you this specific question. What would it look like for few communities of faith to come together, not under a 501c3, but under a coalition of concerned clergy or concerned communities of faith, and advocate on behalf of community to the legislative? So like a case in point, a specific case in point, is the $1.1 billion infrastructure design that was just approved by the Public Service Commission with Alabama Power in the middle of a pandemic. And each episode, until somebody tells me that they ready to march with me down to the Public Service Commission and declare war, I'm gonna keep bringing it up. But they approved a $1.1 billion infrastructure expansion for Alabama Power in the midst of a pandemic, while at the same time saying nothing concerning moratoriums on people's utilities in the middle of this pandemic, when we are experiencing some of the highest numbers in unemployment that we've ever seen. What would it look like for communities of faith to come together as a coalition and speak on behalf of the communities to their legislators?
Well, what I think would be an impressive look to that would be if a whole bunch of ministers wearing their their robes, you know.
Yeah.
Their vestments showed up en masse on the steps of the State House and said, you know, we're here for simple economic justice for people in great need.
Yeah.
You know, it's what you're calling for there. It's first of all, you're not representing churches per se.
Right.
You're people, citizens from churches coming together for a common cause. I personally, and I don't think anybody would see a problem with that. Now, on the other hand, if Reverend Malcolm representing, well, I don't know, you still have your church over in Atlanta, or
No, not anymore.
Not anymore. Well, let's say you got a church
now to do this full time.
Okay, well, good. Glad that you came to a better place.
He is now the preacher without a pulpit.
What was?
But let's say you had a church here. Let's say you had a church here in Pleasant Grove, and you came down. You said my church in Pleasant Grove says that you people are doing wrong, and you need to do better. You need to do right. I think I would avoid saying my church. I'd just say, these people that I go to church with here say that you're doing wrong and you need to do better. And that way, it just, from my point of view, that would keep the church as an organization, as a tax entity, which is all we're talking about here,
right.
Immune to an attack by, say, a hostile IRS.
Gotcha. Thank you. Cal?
I just add amen.
I think it's important that in this time of pandemic, instead of us spending our energy trying to figure out how to get back to old models and old methods of movement, I think we need to really spend some time and energy in how do we best meet the needs of the communities that we serve. And being that I'm today occupied in the seat of Executive Director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, which is an interfaith organization that trains people to be environmental stewards, not only do I have to think about the protections of the people from the moratoriums, but also on a long-term change in policy that protect people. I think that we have to think on those terms when it comes down to using our religious voice, if you will, or moral voice. We have to really think longer term than what we oftentimes do. And a part of that thinking longer term is really looking at energy democracy and ownership of energy, and starting to really look at that from both a health standpoint, because having solar is a lot more healthier and a lot more cleaner than fossil fuel or burning oil. But also looking at it from an economic standpoint, and the fact that economically it provides upward mobility and helps break that cycle of poverty. Now, I know Citizen Climate Lobby is doing a whole lot around carbon dividends. Speak to us about that, as well as in speaking to us about that, how does your legislation come in with that, as well as how could it help us to advance the energy democracy conversation or the energy justice conversation?
Well, the Citizens Climate Lobby supports a particular bill that's now in Congress. It's been in Congress for 2 years. It's HR, that's House of Representatives 763. and that's the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends Act is the title of the bill. And I'd add that it's probably going to receive no vote in this present session. It could well receive a vote in a new Congress and possibly be signed by a president. And even if, even by the way, if the incumbent were to win, there's a feature in this law that he might like to want to sign on, and I'll talk about it right now. The Energy Innovation Act is designed to drive down carbon use by making carbon more expensive. At the fuel pump, people would pay more for the gas. At the heating fuel, they'd pay more for the gas. But in what would happen is that the taxes collected from carbon consumption would go into a special trust fund in the U.S. Treasury, from which every month payments would go to every household, flat rate payments to every household throughout the country. And what would happen is that more people, about 2/3 of the people in the country, would get back more in the dividends payments than they paid for extra costs generated by the carbon tax. What this means is that 2/3 of the country, middle class down through the poor, would have discretionary income coming in every month. And some of that would get eaten up, no doubt, by the carbon extra fuel costs and so forth. But there would be a surplus that people could use to spend the way they wanted to. So what we're thinking here is that if we can drive down carbon use and at the same time provide a buffer for the people who need it most in an expensive economy, that we feel that is a just approach to saving all of us from the increasing threat of climate change due to carbon-induced global warming. The reason I think that somebody like President Trump might sign this bill, he's already shown in the COVID relief package that he wanted his name on the checks. That was something that came up. This way, he would get his name on a check every month to every household in America. So we don't think it's out of the question that even though he doesn't acknowledge climate change and doesn't acknowledge the human role in creating climate change, that he would still see a personal political benefit for signing such a bill into law. But I do think it's going to take a new Congress. We've been told from a very knowledgeable source that the Senate majority leader, Mitch McConnell, has no intention ever of promoting such a bill. And I think that if there's a change in the composition of the Senate next time, we've got a good chance of this happening. Now, I want to say this. I'm veering awfully close to partisan politics when I talk that way. I'm just trying to be factual about what we face in terms of the dynamics within the Congress. And I mean, as far as we're concerned, if anybody in Congress wants to sign on to this bill, and believe me, we've made an effort to recruit every member of the U.S. Congress, House and Senate, to sign on with this bill. We're happy. We don't care if they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or whatever. We just want support to raise the cost of carbon, drive down carbon use, and to distribute the tax proceeds on a just basis to the people who most need it.
Well, listen, John, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today and to help us to understand, provide us better tools for legislative advocacy. Cal, did you have any last words that you wanted to say before we jump off?
Well, just carrying forward your message on the importance of gratitude. We're very, very grateful to have you here today, John.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you guys. Great talk.
Again, thank you. What we're trying to do is provide tools and access for communities to build power from the grassroots up, to fight for justice and change at the policy level. this is one of the ways to do it. It's about being able to get involved and having the proper tools to get involved. This is about seeing something and saying something. It's only that you see something and you say something on a communal level and you say it to the legislators or the ones that are actually making decisions that can help from a policy level. At the end of the day, again, it really is about us getting involved, whether we get involved through face-to-face lobbying, whether we get involved through letters and phone calls, through outreaches to our staff and potential allies, or even through media attention. It's really about getting involved. Again, thank you to John Northrop and the Citizens Climate Lobby for this impactful message, this impactful training. And today, as always, we offer to you peace, love, and light. Thank you, gentlemen.
Poet Beat.